Hi there. In our Grade Booster workshops, we took a look at how to use good paragraph technique to really increase the standard of your responses to tough questions in A-level business. So in this short video, I'm just going to take you through a reminder of what we mean by the PeCAn PiE paragraph technique. The key in A-level business is to respond by meeting the demands of the question. And PeCAn PiE enables you to do this. And it starts with the PE, which is the point explained. Always use the words of the question to state the point that you are about to develop. It signposts to the examiner, shows the examiner that you have thought about the question and that you are about to respond with a relevant point. And of course, a good benefit of using the words of the question is that it can also enable you to start to demonstrate relevant knowledge and understanding. What follows is CAN, which stands for Contextualize Analysis. This is where we explain how and why your point is relevant to the question. The analysis being that combination of a logical chain of reasoning, how and why, or cause and effect, but also bringing in a relevant use of business theory and knowledge. And ideally, maybe more than one different types of business theory or knowledge to build the depth of your point. We call it contextualized analysis because the key is to explain your how and why, your analysis, in the context provided. The question may have asked you to respond in the context of a particular market situation or an industry. And of course, if you're responding to a case study or data response piece, you need to bring in your context from the data provided. Now, for questions that don't require evaluation, so for example, AQA, 12 marks and less, that's all you would need for this paragraph. A point explained followed by contextualized analysis. For questions that require evaluation, the key is to evaluate throughout your response, including the conclusion, and we do that with PIE, which stands for Point Included Evaluation. Now, this slice of pie at the end of the PeCAN is not your conclusion. That's what you need to develop at the end of your response. However, the point included evaluation is a great way to show the examiner that you are considering the evaluative issues raised by the question throughout your response. Now, whilst it's not your conclusion, you can explore, and it depends on point or however point. You might explore whether you've got some reservations or uncertainties about the point you've just developed. But of course, you can also explore whether or not it's always the case that the point you have just developed will occur. So as we'll see in a second, evaluation is an important part of developing your overall response where the question demands it. And we do that at the end of the paragraph in the point included evaluation. Let's have a quick look at an example of this just to show you the technique in action. Here's a typical A-level business question, particularly for AQA students. This might be, for example, a 25 marker in paper 1. To what extent is it essential that a business operates at the lowest cost in an industry in order to be competitive in a mass market? Well, first of all, we have to find the evaluative hook. And in this case, the evaluation hook is the word essential. But the context provided to us is also important. We need to be writing about businesses, markets, where it may be essential to be the lowest cost provider in order to be competitive in a mass market. So we're talking about mass market industries here. Well, let's have a look. A possible point I might develop which argues against the suggestion that it is essential. In other words, a point here that says, no, it's not essential, there's an alternative to being the lowest cost provider, is this one here. A product that is effectively differentiated can still be competitive, even if this business is not operating at the lowest cost. So essentially the point here is around differentiation compared with lowest cost. That would be my point. This is just a plan. My contextualized analysis would need to explain how and why differentiation can be competitive, a source of competitive advantage. And I might bring in one or two theories here. Definitely want to bring in Porter. I could possibly bring in a very similar theory, Bowman's strategic clock for AQA students, possibly branding. And I want to include some context. I know the context here is mass markets, and I'd probably bring in a couple of examples, perhaps the automotive industry and the smartphone industry. My evaluation would need to challenge, in a way, that the idea that differentiation can be a source of competitive advantage, and I might explore how it might not always be the case that this will work. There's my mini plan. Let's now have a look at how this paragraph might be constructed in terms of the words we'd use. Well, don't forget, we always start the PeCAn PiE paragraphs with the words of the question to state the point. So let's have a look. One reason why operating at lowest cost is not essential to being competitive in a mass market, so I'm using the words of the question, would be where a business is able to effectively differentiate its product from the competition, leading to competitive advantage even if the business is not the lowest cost operator. So I've very clearly stated that this point is going to be about differentiation as a source of competitiveness in a mass market. Therefore, that's an argument why you do not necessarily need to operate at lowest cost. What I now need to do is to bring in my contextualized analysis to try and explain how and why that point is relevant, but in context. As Porter argued, and you'll see here, just by putting the word generic strategies, or words in brackets, I've brought in a relevant model, so I don't need to spend a page explaining what Porter's generic strategies model was. Just mention it in a relevant way, gets you the credit. As Porter argued, differentiation can be a powerful source of competitive advantage, even in mass markets where there are likely to be many competitors chasing the many consumers. So what I've done is I've put my context or application here in red, just to show the examiner that I'm talking about mass markets, but also I'm demonstrating that I know what a mass market is. Many competitors, many consumers. A bit more how and why. A differentiated product in a mass market can offer something in addition to a low price that customers value. A bit more context. For example, a smartphone might gain market share as a result of leading edge features, or a new car model might outshine the low-cost competitors due to strong environmental and or safety features. So I've started to use a bit of context to help explain how and why differentiation can work. But then let's bring a bit more theory and let's develop the depth of the analysis here. Where strong branding is part of the marketing mix, so two relevant theories in there straight away, a strategy of differentiation can be particularly effective because consumers place a higher perceived value on a mass market product or business they trust or aspire to owning. A bit more theory developing. Let's bring in another relevant model. As Bowman suggested in his strategic clock, a position of 4, differentiation, or 5, focused differentiation, can also be effective in giving a business a competitive market position. Building a reputation for quality is particularly important to sustain such a position. As mass market leaders like Apple and Nissan demonstrate, so I'll just use a couple more examples for my context there, a high quality product with strong brand awareness and loyalty is a powerful way of delivering the added value that a differentiation strategy requires. Taken as a whole, that's a really compelling line of analysis in context that supports why differentiation can be a source of advantage, competitive advantage in a mass market. But to finish it off, of course, this question has some evaluation required. We're asked, is it essential? We just need to show some evaluation at the end of the sentence. And I'm using the classic evaluation approach, which is to say, of course, there's no guarantee this will always happen. In what circumstances might it not be the case? Let's have a look. Of course, there is no guarantee that a strategy of differentiation will be successful in achieving competitive advantage in a mass market, continuing to use the words of the question. Many mass market leaders, e.g. Nokia, suffered because their competitive advantage was eroded by rivals who were able to offer similar or better value added at a lower price. The success of a differentiation strategy, therefore, depends to a large extent, a lovely evaluative phrase, on the ability of a business to continually innovate, invest in a brand, and sustain high quality. Taken together, and that's what the paragraph looks like in total, that is a PeCAn PiE paragraph that meets the demands of the question by first using the words of the question to state the point, explaining how and why differentiation is a source of potentially a source of advantage in a mass market, but then just tempering it slightly at the end with a nice piece of evaluation that says it's not always the case that this will work. That is a chunky paragraph that meets the demands of the question. And of course, hopefully you would have written a similar paragraph that argues the case why it is important, possibly essential, to be a low-cost operator in a mass market. There we go, guys. That's an example of what we mean by PeCAn paragraphs, and hopefully that illustration will be useful for you as well.